I am a refugee from California. I spent 35 years of my life in California before I moved my family over here to a much better state, Florida. And one of the reasons we moved is because California is dramatically mismanaged. Nearly every summer in California, there would be a request from the state to stop watering your lawn. There would be a request from the state to ensure that you didn't keep your thermostat at below 78 degrees. And now we have this breaking out in California again. And naturally, the entire media have decided that the problem is, of course, global warming, because when bad mismanagement happens, the problem is always global warming in a democratic area, always and forever. It's great. You just blame the sky. The big problem, of course, is that it's very, very hot outside. Now, the problem that I have with this particular explanation is that for a very long time, namely thousands of years, in the summer, it gets very, very hot in California. In fact, my entire life, since I was a small child, it got very hot in the summer in California. In fact, that was one of the draws to California, was summer on the beach in California. But I lived in the valley. I didn't live on the beach. And what that meant is that since the time I was but a barefoot young child, it would be 120 degrees in places like Burbank, California, and North Hollywood, California. It would be just baking outside. And every single year, the grid would be strained. And every single year, there'd be transformers that blew up. I remember there was one summer living in North Hollywood as a teenager where the transformer near our home blew up. It was on a Sabbath, so we couldn't even get in our car and turn on the air conditioner. We just sat there in 120 degree heat, frying our asses off. Well, this sort of thing is frequent in California because California is wildly mismanaged. If it turns out that there is a predictable weather event that happens every single year at a particular time, you have to start actually planning for it and doing things to ramp up, for example, the power production in your state. But California has dedicated itself to the Green Suicide Pact, whereby you are supposed to reduce fossil fuel reliance. You're supposed to rely on significantly less durable green energy. And this is going to fill in the gaps, except when it doesn't. And everybody is supposed to simply suffer through the summer heat in California. I do not understand, given the fact that I picked up my family and my company and left, why people are staying in the state of California. It is, in fact, turning into a hellscape between the homelessness and the crime, the bad energy mismanagement, the bad water mismanagement, the bad social policy. California, which the left uses as sort of the model for the nation, I'm struggling to understand why. And here's the thing. Many of the people who have founded major companies in California, I'm talking about the big tech companies. I've talked to the heads of some big tech companies. Some of those big tech companies would be taken down by a couple bill in their market cap. If I mention the names of the people I've spoken to regularly at those companies, they've said that if they had to start their company all over again today, they certainly would not base it in California. Right now, the situation in California is, of course, pretty bad. According to Fox Business, California's grid operator warned that excessive heat starting on Wednesday would stress the energy grid and potentially lead to blackouts. Again, totally unpredictable that it would get very hot during the summer in California. It's never happened before, except for every year for tens of thousands of years. It said consumer conservation would likely be necessary over the weekend to avert power outages. According to that grid operator, starting tomorrow through Tuesday, California and the West are expecting extreme heat that is likely to strain the grid with increased energy demands, especially over the holiday weekend. It said that in many areas of the West, temperatures are expected to reach triple digits and to break records. They said in what's likely to be the most extensive heat wave in the West so far this year, temperatures in Northern California are expected to be 10 to 20 degrees warmer than normal through Tuesday, September 6th. In Southern California, temperatures are expected to be 10 to 18 degrees warmer than normal. Oh, you mean, well, I don't know what they mean by warmer than normal, like in a given year? Is it 20 degrees hotter than it was last year, or is it 20 degrees hotter than it was, during the winter? Is it 20 degrees hotter than it was 50 years ago or 100 years ago? Like, what are we talking about here? The California Independent System Operator said it's taking measures to bring all available energy resources online and that restricted maintenance operations have been issued from Wednesday through September 6th from noon to 10 p.m. every single day due to high loads and temperatures across the state. On Monday, the peak load for electricity was projected to be the highest of the year, exceeding 48,000 megawatts. Officials will ask Californians not to charge electric vehicles if conditions were... Remember, electric vehicles were supposed to save us all. The problem is electric vehicles really strain the grid. In fact, you know how much electric vehicles strain the grid, right? You're plugging them into the electric grid and they take an enormous amount of energy. By the way, that energy is largely produced by fossil fuels. So this is the great irony of electric vehicles. You're actually being subsidized by the state to a certain extent by fossil fuel use in the state, right? Your electric grid is powered by fossil fuels. You then plug your car into the fossil fuel powered electric grid, and then you don't have to pay for oil. So there's that. In fact, if all of the public transport in places like California were to move electric, the grid could not stand it. It would blow up the grid. It's a serious problem. It's why there are tech companies in places like Israel that are trying to figure out how to recharge electric vehicles as they run down the road. And actually trying to figure out how to use the energy from friction with the road to actually recharge the cars as they move, for example, something like that. Because the electric grid, people forget that when you plug the car into the wall, that actually is powered by the same grid that is powering everything else. This message comes after California regulators moved last week to require all new vehicles in the state to run on electricity by 2035. So they've got a strained electric grid. And so you're going to have to turn off your air conditioner. Also, they are now trying to incentivize every single person in the state of California to move toward an electric vehicle, which will break the electric grid. They're going to need to build more electric grid. They're going to need to up the amount of power generated by the electric grid, but they are refusing to use the actual measures that you would use to increase the power, because all of that stuff, in order to be fuel efficient, is going to actually have to be carbon-based. So there ain't no way to escape this trap, guys. Green energy is just not energy efficient. Green energy just doesn't pay for itself. Green energy is extremely expensive. It is certainly not as reliable. Wind and solar are not nearly as reliable as things like coal, as nuclear, as natural gas, as oil, right? All of the carbon-based fossil fuels are the things that you're still relying on in order to make your green move, your supposed green move, which means that the green vehicles are actually masking the underlying problem again, as always. The decision by the California Air Resources Board came 2 years after Governor Gavin Newsom first directed regulators to consider such a policy. If the goal is reached, California would cut emissions from cars in half by 2040. Yeah, well, they're not explaining how they're going to power all those cars without increasing the emissions that are necessary in order to power that grid. Should grid conditions deteriorate, the ISO may issue a series of emergency notifications to prepare the public for possible energy shortages. In fact, there are already energy shortages last night in Alameda as well as in Palo Alto. So glad to see all of the tech companies feeling it first. Again, the California Independent System Operator is basically acknowledging they just don't have the power to do this. Elliot Mainzer, the CEO of ISO, said in a video, quote, "I know this has been a very long heat wave, and we're not asking you to do even more, but please stick with us and don't use any more power than is absolutely necessary." Late on Tuesday afternoon, solar power was supplying about a fifth of the state's power demand. Where's the other 4/5 coming from? Would that be the nasty, terrible sources of energy that you guys have been reducing for years on end? If demand for power exhausts the grid's electric reserves, the ISO said it would instruct utility to start imposing rotating outages, the first time the state has taken such a measure since a brutal heat wave in August 2020. Wow, I mean, that's a really long time. No, it's not. That's like 2 years ago, guys. Remember that time 2 years ago that you blew it? And now you're doing it now. By the way, the reason that this didn't happen during 2021 is because, again, in the middle of the COVID pandemic, there were just a lot more people who were staying home. Maybe it wasn't quite as hot, but even then it strained the power grid. It's amazing. So this is the state that we're supposed to imitate. And according to the left, California is the leader. Gavin Newsom is trying to propose himself as a possible alternative to Joe Biden in 2024 should the old man fall down on the stairs or something. And so Gavin Newsom made an announcement yesterday that it's time for everybody to do their part. He'll be over at the French Laundry enjoying the food and the air conditioning.
Everyone has to do their part to help step up for just a few more days. Individuals, the state, industries, business, all doing their part to help reduce strain on the grid. Now, here's specifically what you can do. In the early morning hours, particularly tomorrow and the next day or so, pre-cool your home. Run your air conditioning earlier in the day when more power is available. And we encourage you to close your windows and blinds to keep your home cool as well. And today and tomorrow afternoon, after 4 p.m., in particular 4 p.m., please turn your thermostat up to 78 degrees or higher and avoid, to the extent possible, using any really large appliances.
Right, stop using your microwave. No washer and dryer at like 8 p.m. And you know it's a great lifestyle. California, where freedom happened, according to Gavin Newsom. He cut an entire commercial that he ran in Florida about how freedom's happening in California. I noticed that it isn't, which is why I don't live there anymore. He also tweeted out, "California, we're now in a flex alert." What does that mean? We need to conserve as much energy as possible during this record-breaking heat wave, because it's never been hot in California before. Here's what to do until 9 p.m. tonight. Set thermostats to 78. Turn off unnecessary lights. Avoid using large appliances. Turn off unnecessary lights. So sit in the dark, in the heat, and enjoy your freedom, California. Representative Eric Swalwell, who apparently did not tweet this from the bed of a Chinese spy, he tweeted, quote, "It's time to rally, California. We all need to do our part to help avoid power outages this week. Before 4 p.m., pre-cool your home." By the way, if everybody does that, they're going to have a flex alert at 4 p.m. If everybody blasts that air conditioner as hard as they can at 3 p.m., they're going to have another flex alert. After 4 p.m., avoid use of major appliances. Turn your thermostat to 78 or higher. 78 or higher. My goodness. Ugh, that sounds terrible. You know what I kept my thermostat at here in Florida last night? 68 degrees. It was awesome. Let's keep the lights on, California, says Eric Swalwell. Let's keep the light on. I love the communitarian aspect of this. By the way, you'll pay for it. You'll pay for it through your taxes to not upgrade the grid. Brianne Depeche, the energy and environment reporter over at the Washington Examiner, has an excellent piece talking about why California's grid is at the risk of blackouts. She talks about the fact that, of course, demand is high. Demand is high, particularly between 4 p.m. and 9 p.m. Solar power generation decreases. That would be the reason why they are saying from 4 to 9 p.m., you should start to ramp down your energy usage, right? The reason is not actually because it's more hot, 4 to 9 p.m. Actually, that's when it cools down. The answer is, what happens at 4 p.m.? Well, the sun starts to set and the solar energy stops going online. Why, it's almost as though solar energy is not all that efficient for human use. To offset that imbalance, grid operators can call for consumers to conserve electricity voluntarily via that Flex Alert program. Severin Borenstein, a professor at University of California, Berkeley's Haas School of Business, says, quote, "I'm not a believer we should be doing this through voluntary pleading. I think we should have a price system that actually lowers the price most of the time and then raises the price when the system is tight." Yeah, but they can't do pricing. Prices are bad, guys. Profit. Evil profit. So instead, they're going to just request. They had this with water usage when I was in California. They wouldn't actually allow the pricing system to take care of the problem because the rich people would continue to water their lawns and people who are not as rich would not continue to water their lawns. So instead, we will redistribute the misery equally. Supply has been dramatically constrained in California. According to the Washington Examiner, the historic drought conditions and record low reservoir levels have reduced the state's ability to generate hydropower by 48%. By the way, they've built no new dams. They built no new reservoirs. That's something that Jerry Brown should have been doing 20 years ago, and he didn't do any of this stuff. In-state hydroelectric power fell last year to just 7% of California's utility-scale net generation, according to data from the U.S. Energy Information Administration, down from nearly 21% in 2017. That's not only the effect of heat and drought on the supply of energy, they also exacerbate the risk of wildfires. California narrowly avoided a blackout last summer after the bootleg wildfire on the California-Oregon border damaged interstate transmission lines and temporarily halted some electricity imports. Speaking of which, interstate imports are key for California because California, despite being the most populous state in the union with the most natural resources, has to get 25% of its electricity from other Western states. But the reliability of the imports has gone down in recent years because states have been phasing out coal-fired power plants in the West, right? All of these surrounding states have been moving toward green. California imports energy from Arizona, New Mexico, Nevada, Oregon, and Washington, but those states are grappling with the same heat and drought conditions as California, and they also took many of their own fossil fuel-powered plants offline. Since 2013, these states retired more than 10 gigawatts of fossil fuel generating capacity, leaving them with little excess resources to sell to California. Operators noted yesterday 4 of those 5 states are also expecting to be hit by the heat wave. California produces a huge amount of renewable energy through wind and solar power and produces more solar power than it can use during the middle of the day. The problem is that the batteries don't work. The challenge is when in the evening, solar power declines, but people are still running those ACs. In its annual summer reliability assessment, according to the Washington Examiner, the North American Electric Reliability Corporation put the entire West at elevated risk for reserve shortages, with regulators warning that the state could face a power shortage of up to 1,700 megawatts on the hottest days. In addition, operators warned of possible disturbances to the state's solar photovoltaic, or PV system, which converts solar into electricity. Disturbances to that technology continue to be a reliability concern. New renewable battery storage projects for wind and solar could keep supply online for longer, but California has been unable to match peak summer demand with increased capacity. Supply chain problems have also delayed many solar projects from advancing. So again, California has basically cut itself off at the knees because it turns out that radical environmentalism in the face of reality does not work. I'm sorry to break it to you, but no matter how much money you pour into sources of energy that are not nearly energy efficient enough, it is not going to make up for these gaps. It just isn't. And people are going to pay the price for this. Real people, taxpayers. How's this for a title? Ben Shapiro Show subscriber destroys like button with clicks and logic. I'd watch that. Make it happen, gang.